Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Research Podcast. Today we're taking an immersive deep dive into one of the most volatile and complex geopolitical situations unfolding right now. We're talking about the escalating conflict between Iran and Israel. It's a situation just shrouded in intense headlines, conflicting reports, and, well, frankly, a lot of noise. It can make it incredibly difficult to grasp what's truly happening on the ground. So our mission today is to really unpack the intense dynamics at play here. We want to uncover some of the hidden narratives, maybe reveal some surprising facts behind those headlines. Basically, we're cutting through the static to get to the real implications for everyone involved, especially for you, our listener, if you want to be truly well-informed beyond the breaking news alerts. For this deep dive, we're pulling from a really diverse stack of sources, everything from analyses by figures incredibly close to former U.S. President Donald Trump, to economic and political commentary from prominent Israeli and U.S. journalists, and even some critical strategic assessments of regional power dynamics. It's a mosaic of perspectives, really, that offers, hopefully, a far more nuanced picture than what you'll typically find.
Yeah, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there. It really is a high-stakes moment, isn't it? The atmosphere is just thick with intense warnings, particularly coming out of a lot of U.S. media outlets. They've been suggesting this critical 48-hour window, almost like a ticking clock, that could dramatically escalate this conflict, potentially turning it into what they're calling an open scenario. Which means, essentially, a full-blown, widespread military confrontation, not just skirmishes. And we saw a very significant development just recently that really underscores this. The reported strike on Ayman, that's Israel's military intelligence directorate, distinct from Mossad, the foreign agency right in Tel Aviv. This strike was reportedly carried out by an Iranian missile. And U.S. media, among others, seems to view this particular event as a major shift in the conflict's trajectory. This is precisely why a deep dive like this is so essential. We need to understand what's really happening on the ground versus what's being reported, and crucially, why those differences matter so profoundly for the future of the region and really beyond. It's not just about what you hear, it's also about what you don't hear.
Absolutely. So let's unpack this. A crucial starting point for our deep dive today comes from, well, a truly unexpected place. We're talking about insights shared by a journalist, Michael O'Reilly, who apparently has unparalleled access to former U.S. President Donald Trump. O'Reilly isn't just getting a few quotes here and there. He's apparently had direct text message exchanges with Trump, which gives us this sort of unfiltered, unvarnished window into the former president's personal perspective on the Iran-Israel conflict. It's not just a soundbite. It's like a glimpse into his strategic thinking, or at least what he's sharing.
Right. And what's truly intriguing here is how clearly Trump seems to have outlined his calculated non-intervention strategy in those exchanges. He's been quite explicit, apparently, about his primary reason for not wanting the U.S. to intervene directly in this specific Israel-Iran conflict. His top priority, he reportedly told O'Reilly, is to avoid entanglement with global powers, specifically Russia and China. He sees any direct U.S. involvement as opening, and this is his phrase, a different set of calculations, basically a complex, multi-layered geopolitical chess game that he is absolutely determined to steer clear of. His preferred solution, as he described it, well, it's for the U.S. to essentially push Israel forward. He views Israel, quite starkly actually, as a pistol, his word, to strike Iran, thereby keeping the U.S., Russia, and China outside the immediate conflict zone.
A pistol, that's a really stark image. So keep the major powers out of it, use Israel as the actor.
Exactly. He believes this is the optimal approach to contain the situation, without drawing in global superpowers and risking a much larger conflagration. It's a very hands-off, almost detached strategic play from his perspective.
Okay, and it gets even more fascinating when you hear about Trump's endgame prediction for this whole scenario. What did he tell O'Reilly about how this ends?
Well, he apparently believes the conflict will ultimately culminate in Iran's surrender. But it's not just a simple military defeat he's talking about. He sees the most probable scenario as a popular uprising. The Iranian people themselves rising up against the current regime. He envisages this mechanism of surrender where, despite initial refusal and, defiance from Tehran, Iran will eventually yield to overwhelming international pressure.
Okay, so internal pressure combined with external pressure leads to surrender. What does that surrender look like in his view?
It would involve a full opening of their nuclear facilities for inspection. That's key. And critically, the dismantling of their entire arsenal, both missile and nuclear capabilities, all under stringent international supervision. He explicitly links this to the Libyan model.
The Gaddafi precedent, where Libya voluntarily dismantled its program.
Right, that infamous precedent. But Trump adds a critical difference here. Iran, in his view, will be forced into it. They won't choose it willingly, like Gaddafi supposedly did. It's less about persuasion, more about coercion,
Yeah.
pushing a new kind of denuclearization paradigm, maybe.
Forced compliance, not voluntary. Got it.
Mm-hmm. And Trump's assessment also seems to touch on some significant internal cracks within the Iranian system itself. He's noted reports, or at least he believes there are reports, of deep disagreements and what he describes as widespread panic within the Iranian regime's upper echelons. Now, this isn't just speculation on his part. It's reportedly amplified by the relentless and, frankly, shockingly effective impact of Israeli assassinations.
Yeah, those have been relentless.
They really have. We're talking about targeted killings of high-ranking military leaders, people incredibly close, personally and professionally, to Ayatollah Khamenei himself. To give you some specific examples that our sources highlight, I mean, the list is long. The commander of the Revolutionary Guard was killed, so was the intelligence chief and his deputy. The Quds Force commander, that's the IRGC's external operations arm, a really key player, also eliminated. And then, chillingly, the chief of staff of the Iranian army and his deputy were assassinated.
Wow. And wasn't there something about the replacement being targeted too?
That's the most stark part. His replacement was reportedly killed within days of his appointment.
That's just staggering. A revolving door of assassinations at the highest level. What's the consequence of these killings for Khamenei and the regime's stability?
Well, the consequence, according to various reports and analyses we're looking at, is that Khamenei is feeling a profound vacuum of trusted individuals around him. Think of it like, a leader whose most loyal, vetted, and experienced advisors are just systematically removed one by one. So new leaders are being rapidly appointed, but many of them are less loyal or certainly less deeply vetted than their predecessors. They haven't been with him for decades. This inner circle, the one that traditionally protects Khamenei and filters out dissent, it's reportedly becoming porous, filled with less familiar faces.
So the protective circle is weakening.
Exactly. And that potentially makes him far more vulnerable to internal dissent, to differing opinions surfacing. And it certainly makes it harder for him to manage the various factions and disagreements that inevitably emerge within any complex regime, especially under pressure. This, as Trump seems to suggest, might just be the accelerant for the system's eventual weakening or even, collapse. It speaks to a deep, destabilizing internal pressure that's often overlooked in the focus on external strikes.
Okay, so if we step back and connect this internal vulnerability to the broader strategic picture, Trump's timeline for this whole endgame scenario is what truly makes you pause. He explicitly told Michael O'Reilly, apparently, that this complete surrender or collapse would happen, and I quote, within days.
Within days, not weeks or months.
No, within days, and he apparently clarified this isn't just a ceasefire, a temporary pause. He meant a total surrender, a real end to the conflict as we know it. Something that fundamentally alters the power dynamics in the region. It's a very, very bold and remarkably precise prediction, and it certainly sets a high bar for what he expects to unfold. It's a vision that, frankly, directly contrasts with what we hear from many other analysts, particularly analysts within Israel itself.
It truly does. It paints a picture of swift, decisive action and maybe, just maybe, an underestimation of Iranian resilience, perhaps?
Yeah, exactly. Which brings us to the Israeli perspective. So what does this all mean for Israel? Because we hear very different narratives coming out of Jerusalem, don't we? For instance, a senior official on Israeli Channel 14 dramatically declared the next 48 hours in the Israel-Iran war as decisive.
Yeah, I saw that report. Decisive.
Right. The implication here is stark. Israel intends to launch devastating strikes. They're aiming to force Iran's surrender or trigger something else, whatever that might mean. It strongly suggests a belief within at least parts of the Israeli establishment in their capacity for a swift, overwhelming victory, which sounds, much more in line with Trump's predicted outcome, but obviously from an Israeli operational perspective.
It does. But what's particularly thought-provoking here and offers a real counterpoint comes from David Rosenberg. He's an economic editor and writer for Haaretz in foreign policy. Described, interestingly, as Zionist writer, so not someone inherently anti-Israel. And he offers a very strong counter-narrative to that triumphant Israeli official line. Rosenberg's core argument, essentially, is that Netanyahu is projecting a false image of Iranian weakness and imminent collapse.
So Rosenberg is saying Netanyahu's narrative is misleading.
Deeply misleading, according to Rosenberg. He contends that if Iran is supposedly that weak, then Israel, in fact, is even weaker. His evidence for Israel's weakness is quite stark, and it comes from looking at their own operational reality. 20 months, nearly 2 years of continuous war have left the Israeli army exhausted, profoundly drained. This protracted conflict has taken a severe toll on their resources, their personnel, their national morale. It's not sustainable indefinitely.
And he's worried this misleading narrative could have wider consequences.
That's his significant concern. It isn't just about internal perception in Israel. He worries that this misrepresentation of Iranian weakness might also be fed to American officials, which could potentially lead to incorrect strategic assessments in Washington and ultimately flawed policy decisions. It's basically a warning against self-deception influencing global strategy. A very dangerous path.
That's a crucial point, the idea that a domestic narrative could impact international strategy so profoundly. Okay, so if Rosenberg is right, and Israel is actually weaker than it portrays itself, then what does that say about Iran's actual capabilities, about its ability to withstand this pressure?
You've hit on a critical question there. Rosenberg directly counters the narrative of Iran's collapsed missile capabilities, which, Israel has frequently propagated. Despite Israeli claims of destroying Iranian missile platforms, Iran just keeps launching attacks with surprising frequency and sometimes precision. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard, for example, claimed direct responsibility for striking that Israeli Military Intelligence Directorate, AMEN, which we mentioned earlier, and also a Mossad operations center, both located right in Tel Aviv. These aren't minor targets.
Right, and Iran is pushing back against the narrative of weakness officially, too.
Oh, absolutely. Official Iranian statements, relayed through their news agency, IRNA, quoted an IRGC commander's advisor, who emphatically stated that claims of dwindling missile stocks are, quote, an illusion. He went even further, stating that the IRGC has not yet even used its strategic missile capabilities. Now, okay, that could be partly bravado, sure, but if it's even partly true, it suggests a vast, untapped reserve of weaponry that could dramatically alter the conflict's dynamics if deployed. It points towards a patient, long-term strategy from Iran rather than one born of desperation.
That's a significant claim, implying Iran has a lot more in its arsenal than is being publicly acknowledged or maybe even understood. But hang on, how is Iran getting such precise intelligence to make these targeted strikes, especially if they're supposedly isolated or under immense pressure?
This is where it gets really interesting, and it's a critical piece of the puzzle that's often missed. Intelligence parity, or something close to it. Our sources indicate that Iran gained crucial intelligence on Israel through Hezbollah's expensive drone flights. Remember, Hezbollah is Iran's proxy in Lebanon, right on Israel's northern border. They apparently conducted numerous drone flights over critical Israeli areas, Tel Aviv, Haifa, key military sites, and they gathered a massive amount of photographic and video intelligence. We're talking detailed imagery of installations, movements, infrastructure. This invaluable detailed data was then reportedly transferred directly to Iran.
So Hezbollah acted as Iran's eyes in the sky over Israel.
Essentially, yes. And this means that Iran now possesses, or at least has access to, a much clearer and more comprehensive picture of Israeli skies, strategic targets, and defensive layouts than many assume. Perhaps as clear as Israel has of Tehran. It's a potential game changer in terms of intelligence. It allows Iran to target more effectively, even under pressure. It's not about blind strikes. It seems to be about informed, calculated attacks based on pretty solid, actionable intelligence.
Okay, so we're not talking about blind, desperate attacks. We're talking about potentially targeted, informed strikes based on good intel. And if Netanyahu really expected a swift victory, it sounds like he miscalculated badly on Iran's capabilities and its resilience.
He absolutely seems to have, based on this analysis. Netanyahu likely assumed a quick end to the war, a swift victory, one that would not only eliminate Iran's nuclear program, the big prize, but also cripple its missile capabilities and regional influence, knock them down several pegs. But the Iranian strategy is clearly one of resilience and endurance. It seems designed to outlast its opponent. Iran is actively resisting and, importantly, inflicting unprecedented losses on Israel, both military and economic. We've seen concrete examples that highlight this, like that widely reported fire at the Haifa oil refinery.
Right, the videos of that were everywhere, a major strategic site.
Exactly, and broadcasting those videos underscored the visual impact. This is a site of immense economic and strategic importance for Israel. Its damage signifies a real, tangible impact on Israel's infrastructure, its economy, maybe even its psyche.
And this resilience you're saying isn't actually new for Iran. It has historical precedents.
Not at all new. If we connect this to the broader historical context, you can draw some really striking parallels. Think back to the 8-year Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. During that conflict, Iran was significantly weaker than it is today, objectively weaker. It had no advanced missile program to speak of, far less sophisticated intelligence capabilities, and certainly no powerful established proxies like Hezbollah or the Houthis operating actively in its favor back then. Yet despite being the weaker party, Iran endured a pure war of attrition for nearly a decade. against a formidable adversary, Iraq, which was backed by multiple international powers.
So they've weathered this kind of storm before, even when weaker.
They have. And Iran's current bet, according to our sources, seems to be that Israel simply cannot sustain a long war of attrition this time. Due to its current state of exhaustion, they believe Israel lacks the economic and military stamina for a prolonged conflict of this nature right now. Furthermore, there's a key difference in leadership that underscores this resolve. Unlike Ayatollah Khomeini, who famously drank the cup of poison, as he put it, by signing the peace agreement with Iraq to finally end that draining war, Ayatollah Khamenei, the current supreme leader, is reportedly resolved not to sign any such agreement. He won't drink the poison. He seems determined to continue the fight despite potentially heavy losses, believing that endurance, outlasting Israel, is their ultimate path to victory, even if it's a slow, grinding, painful one.
Okay, so we've established that this conflict probably isn't ending quickly, despite some maybe overly optimistic predictions. And what's truly eye-opening here is the potential fallout for Israel if this does indeed become a protracted conflict. I mean, our sources suggest that Tel Aviv itself might not survive a prolonged war of attrition in its current form. That's a huge statement. The sheer scale of potential catastrophic damage to its urban centers, its infrastructure, could be immense, beyond anything Israel has previously faced. And beyond just the physical destruction, there's the immense economic cost. Israel, as a nation, probably cannot withstand the financial burden of this conflict if it continues indefinitely, especially with its reserves being drained, the army mobilized.
The economic strain is immense.
Right. So the core strategic failure for Israel here seems profound. They aimed for a quick, decisive strike to eliminate Iran's nuclear program and missile capabilities, but they have demonstrably failed to achieve this rapid victory so far. And the longer this goes on, the more vulnerable Israel becomes, economically, strategically, maybe even socially.
Yeah, and this brings us to a really fundamental question about Israel's self-perception versus its actual reality on the global stage. Stephen Walt, who you mentioned earlier, a brilliant writer for foreign policy, a really sharp analyst, he delves into this. He has a critical assessment that directly challenges some established narratives about Israeli power. His central argument is that Israel's self-perception as a great power is fundamentally flawed, especially, he argues, if it were to somehow claim victory against Iran in this conflict.
Okay, so Walt is saying even a quote-unquote win wouldn't make Israel a great power. Why not? What's his reasoning?
Well, he contends that true great powers think the U.S., Russia, China are genuinely independent. They can project power globally without significant external reliance. Israel, by stark contrast, relies heavily on another great power, the United States, for its security, its most advanced weaponry, often its diplomatic backing, even sometimes its strategic decisions. That reliance, in Walt's view, fundamentally undermines the claim to independent great power status. It's a crucial distinction.
Dependency versus independence. Makes sense. What other points does he make?
Furthermore, Walt points out that great powers are not typically threatened by all their neighbors simultaneously. The only exception he sort of cites is the unique and maybe anomalous scenario with Russia and Ukraine right now, which he frames as a very particular set of circumstances. Israel, on the other hand, faces persistent threats on virtually all its borders. From multiple non-state actors, it's a constant state of siege, almost. And finally, there's the simple demographic reality. Israel's population, around 10 million people, is simply too small to constitute a great power in the traditional sense. Great powers usually imply a much larger resource base, manpower base, needed to project sustained global influence. Now, this isn't to diminish Israel's very real military strength or its technological prowess, but it's about its capacity for independent, sustained, great power projection on a global scale. Walt argues it just isn't there.
Okay, that's a sobering assessment, but raises an important question. If Israel isn't truly a great power by these metrics, then what's behind this pervasive narrative of dominance that we so often hear? It feels like the perceived Israeli propaganda or public diplomacy is often far stronger than maybe their actual military actions fully support. Like, they're aiming to convince the world, and perhaps even themselves, of their strength and regional control. And the danger of this illusion, as Walt seems to imply, is profound. If Israel truly believes it's a great power, unconstrained by its actual limitations, it might pursue dangerous, unfeasible agendas, leading to strategic miscalculations with severe unintended consequences for the entire region. What could those miscalculations look like?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it underscores why a nuanced understanding of Iran's resilience, maybe even transcending sectarian differences for a moment, becomes strategically important for the broader region. Walt argues that Iran's endurance, just its ability to keep going in this protracted conflict, directly drains Israel. militarily, economically, psychologically. The implication is pretty significant. If Iran succeeds in weathering this period without surrendering, it would be a major victory for Tehran. Not necessarily a military conquest, obviously not, but a victory of attrition, a victory that prevents Israel from believing it has won anything substantial or achieved its maximalist goals.
So Iran wins by not losing, essentially, by just enduring.
In a way, yes. And Waltz observes that Israel has historically not fully eliminated its enemies in past conflicts. Hezbollah is still strong in Lebanon after multiple wars. The Houthis remain a force in Yemen. Remnants of Assad's forces still exist in Syria. Israel contains threats, degrades capabilities, but rarely achieves total eradication of its adversaries. And the body of Iran itself remains cohesive. It has not been invaded, not been decisively defeated on the ground in the way some might have hoped or predicted. And ultimately, Waltz suggests if Arab nations could somehow collectively unite, which is a significant if, let's be honest, it could profoundly challenge Netanyahu's ambitious vision of a new Middle East shaped precisely according to his will and Israeli dominance. Iran's resilience keeps that possibility alive, perhaps.
Okay. We often hear so much about what's happening in Tehran, the strikes, the responses, the regime's actions. But what's not getting nearly enough attention, it seems, is the situation within Tel Aviv itself. And our sources suggest it's a shocking contrast. A reality that's arguably far more brutal for its residents than what's being widely portrayed. We're hearing these unsettling reports, for example, of a quiet, almost desperate evacuation of Tel Aviv taking place under the radar. What's going on there?
Yeah, what's truly astonishing here are these hidden realities. The widespread panic reportedly gripping parts of Israel, especially Tel Aviv. Reports from sources like Haaretz, again, a respected Israeli newspaper, indicate that Israelis are desperately trying to flee the country. They're reportedly using boats, sometimes disguised as casual fishing trips, to escape to Cyprus to Greece.
Yeah.
Our sources emphasize these are not recreational excursions. These are desperate attempts by ordinary citizens to find safety elsewhere.
Wow. Fleeing by boat like refugees.
It has that feel, based on these reports. Furthermore, there are an estimated 40,000 tourists reportedly trapped in Israel, unable to leave because Ben Gurion Airport, the main international gateway, is either closed or operating under severe restrictions. Flights canceled, routes limited, and land borders, say with Egypt or Jordan, are also proving unreliable or are outright closed for passage for many people. The Israeli population, according to these accounts, feels genuinely besieged, trapped within their own borders.
And the government's response to this attempted exodus, that's quite telling too, isn't it? It suggests a level of alarm at the top.
Absolutely. It speaks volumes about how severe the situation is perceived to be internally. An Israeli minister publicly declared in quite a chilling statement, really, that Israelis would not be permitted to leave the country. Now, that reflects the government's palpable fear of a mass exodus. They're worried not only about the optics, the international morale, but also the very real drain on manpower, on national cohesion, if huge numbers start leaving.
Trying to stop a brain drain or just a people drain during a crisis?
Precisely. And it's not just internal movement that's restricted. Globally, Israel has taken extraordinary measures. They've reportedly closed nearly all of their embassies and consulates worldwide, with the reported exception of Washington, D.C., and maybe a few key European locations, but most are shut. Diplomatic missions have been withdrawn due to fears of retaliatory operations by Iranian intelligence abroad. They fear attacks on their diplomats. This crucial information, the shuttering of embassies, is largely suppressed or downplayed by mainstream media, which tends to focus much more on what's happening in Iran rather than the very significant defensive and withdrawal measures Israel is taking globally. It highlights a hidden vulnerability.
That's incredible. A near total shutdown of their diplomatic presence abroad due to security concerns. That's a huge move. And what about the civilian infrastructure within Israel, especially in a densely populated area like Tel Aviv? Are people truly safe there? Are there hidden struggles on the ground we're not seeing?
It's another grim reality that's often obscured by the focus on military strikes. Our sources reveal that only an estimated 40% of Tel Aviv reportedly has proper, secure, government-designated bomb shelters. Only 40%. The remaining population, a significant majority, relies on largely improvised spaces. Think underground parking garages, basements, used for refuge. But what's truly shocking and frankly disturbing is the reported discrimination happening within even these inadequate shelters. They are astonishingly reported to be exclusively for Israelis, tourists, foreign nationals, migrant workers. They are reportedly denied entry even in moments of crisis, like during missile alerts.
Denied entry to shelters. Seriously.
According to these reports, yes. There's even a widely circulating video referenced in our sources, apparently showing Israelis physically preventing Thai workers from entering shelters. It highlights a deeply disturbing form of racism and inequality that seems to surface during these acute moments of crisis. This reveals a level of internal disarray, maybe societal tension, that isn't often highlighted in the broader coverage. And it could certainly impact national unity during a prolonged conflict.
That's a stark and truly disturbing detail. It reveals deep internal divisions, even under external threat. Okay, so while Tel Aviv faces these internal struggles, this panic, these evacuations, what's fascinating is how Iran seems to be pushing back, not just defensively, but with active targeted strikes that seem to be increasing in sophistication. We've heard about the Haifa refinery attack, but you mentioned there's more, like the Natufim Air Base.
Exactly. There was a significant attack reported on Natufim Air Base. This is a crucial facility. It houses Israel's advanced F-35 jets, a key asset, maybe the key asset, of the Israeli Air Force. Iran reportedly struck this base not just with 1 or 2 missiles, but with a salvo of missiles. That indicates a coordinated, substantial attack. It suggests a sustained and serious capability, not just pot shots. And it's not just any missiles they're reportedly using. There's mention of hypersonic missiles.
Hypersonics. Those are the ones that are incredibly hard to intercept.
Notoriously difficult, even for the most advanced air defenses, like Israel's Iron Dome or David's Sling systems. Hypersonics travel too fast, maneuver too erratically. In fact, the Israeli military itself has somewhat quietly admitted that their air defenses cannot intercept all Iranian missiles. They just can't guarantee 100% coverage. They cited a specific instance, apparently, where something like 65 missiles and dozens of drones were launched by Iran in a single day, and some successfully got through their multi-layer defense systems and hit their targets. So the shield isn't impenetrable.
Okay, so Iran is demonstrating capability, hitting key targets, even using advanced missiles.
Which brings us back to that other alarming strategy being employed, this time by Israel, the systematic assassination of high-value Iranian military leaders. We talked about the pattern earlier, but the example of Ali Shabmani is particularly chilling. He was the newly appointed chief of staff of the Iranian army, a figure described as exceptionally close to Ayatollah Khamenei, and he was assassinated in the heart of Tehran. Not on some border, but in the capital.
And he'd only just been appointed, right, replacing someone else who was killed.
Exactly. He had only been in the job for 4 days prior to his assassination, replacing the previous chief of staff who had also been assassinated, reportedly right at the war's outset. This establishes a terrifying pattern. Israel seems to be systematically assassinating newly appointed high-ranking military leaders. It looks like a clear attempt to create chaos, prevent organized Iranian retaliation, and disrupt command continuity. It's an explicit attempt to cut off the head of Iran's military command structure to prevent any cohesive, effective response from forming.
And the implication is that Israeli intelligence must have incredible reach inside Iran to pull this off repeatedly.
That's the unavoidable implication. This level of success, hitting targets like that in Tehran, points to a significant Israeli intelligence operation with incredibly deep penetration into the highest echelons of power.
An intelligence operation that sounds incredibly pervasive. It's not just targeted strikes from afar. It suggests a sustained, deep infiltration that, frankly, few would expect is possible on that scale.
That's right. And our sources reveal something startling related to this. The reported discovery of a vast, intricate network within Iran. We're talking Israeli spies, drone warehouses, even drone manufacturing facilities reportedly located inside Tehran and spread across Iran. This army of agents, as it's starkly described in some reports, it's apparently been developed over 20 years, a long-term project with significant Israeli investment. It's even described, maybe hyperbolically, but maybe not, as being potentially more lethal than the Israeli regular army in its capacity to disrupt and destabilize the Iranian regime from within.
An army of agents inside Iran.
Wow. Yeah. This deep infiltration is highlighted as arguably the biggest strategic weakness of the Iranian regime currently. It demonstrates how vulnerable they might be to internal sabotage, to intelligence operations, and it helps explain the high success rate of these assassinations. It paints a picture of a shadow war being fought at a very intimate, clandestine level alongside the missile exchanges.
Okay, that's a lot to take in on the ground and behind the scenes. Let's shift focus slightly and turn our attention back to the U.S. We started with Trump's views, his calculated non-intervention stance he shared privately. But recently, publicly, he made that dramatic, headline-grabbing exit from the G7 summit. What does that signal about the American role? Or perhaps it's mixed signals in this escalating conflict?
Yeah, that G7 exit was certainly a moment that caused a lot of head-scratching and speculation globally, wasn't it? Trump abruptly left the summit, stating quite enigmatically that great and important things required his presence back in Washington. Very vague. Initial speculation, quite understandably, was that his departure was directly related to the rapidly escalating Iran-Israel war, given its gravity and timing. President Macron of France even publicly criticized Trump's departure, suggesting it was inappropriate given the conflict's global implications.
But Trump denied it was about Iran and Israel, right?
He did. He later publicly denied that his departure was specifically for the Iran-Israel conflict. He claimed it was for something bigger, though the specific reason remains unknown or at least undisclosed to this day. So this ambiguity surrounding his public actions, especially contrasted with his earlier reported private remarks to O'Reilly, it certainly creates confusion about the true U.S. stance, or at least about his immediate priorities at that moment.
Okay, so ambiguity from the top, perhaps. But despite that, we've also seen very clear and decisive actions from the U.S. military. That suggests a strategic posture regardless of presidential pronouncements, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Actions often speak louder than words, especially in geopolitics. There's been a significant and undeniable deployment of U.S. military assets to the Middle East, a major buildup. This includes sending the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier, one of the largest warships in the world, to the Middle East. And that's in addition to the USS Carl Vinson, another massive carrier, which was reportedly already present in the region. This huge buildup of naval and air power suggests very serious preparation for various contingencies, even if the official political messaging from Washington remains mixed or, evasive.
So the military is preparing, but what is the official line on intervention?
Well, speaking of mixed signals, official U.S. statements coming from various American officials have explicitly stated that the U.S. is not joining the war. They've said the U.S. is not involved in the Israel-Iran conflict currently, note the currently. Furthermore, a Republican representative even introduced a bill in Congress designed specifically to prevent direct U.S. involvement in the war. So you have this paradox, immense military presence building up, but official political disengagement, even legislative moves against involvement.
It's definitely confusing. On one hand, this massive military buildup suggests readiness to act. On the other, official denials of intervention and even legislative efforts to prevent it. So what then is the precise line in the sand? What would actually trigger U.S. intervention? Is there a clear condition?
What's truly illuminating here, according to the sources we're looking at, is the very precise condition identified for U.S. intervention. The U.S., it's reported, will only enter the war if, and this is a big if, the Iranian regime begins to show clear, unambiguous signs of collapse, actual systemic collapse. The rationale for this, as articulated, wouldn't primarily be to save Israel or defeat Iran militarily. It would be to secure Iran's nuclear program, to prevent fissile material or weapons from falling into the hands of terrorists or unknown splinter groups amidst a chaotic collapse.
So it's about WMD security, not necessarily picking a side in the conflict itself.
Exactly. Preventing proliferation in a failed state scenario. Specific facilities like Fordo and Isfahan are mentioned as key targets for this potential securing operation. These are sites that Israel has reportedly failed to destroy on its own despite trying. This implies a very specific, potentially limited intervention focused on nuclear non-proliferation and regional stability in a collapse scenario, not a broader military engagement aimed at regime change itself or even necessarily the defense of Israel beyond that specific mission. It's a very particular strategic trigger point.
A very specific and frankly quite high bar for intervention waiting for regime collapse.
Okay. And what about other potential flashpoints that could draw the U.S. in? Maybe less directly, perhaps without an official declaration. There was also that mysterious Bab el-Mandeb incident involving oil tankers. Indeed. That's a curious detail that definitely warrants attention, even if it flew under the radar a bit. There is this mysterious incident involving 3 oil tankers or ships catching fire, seemingly simultaneously, near Bab el-Mandeb. Now, for our listeners, Bab el-Mandeb is that critical choke point for global oil transit at the southern end of the Red Sea. Hugely important. British maritime authorities quickly came out and claimed it was not a security incident. They implied it wasn't an attack, certainly didn't attribute it to any specific actor like Iran or the Houthis.
The 3 ships catching fire at the same time near a choke point. That sounds suspicious.
Highly suspicious. The simultaneous nature of the incident on 3 separate vessels, right near such a critically strategic choke point. It certainly raises profound questions. Questions about whether Iran, or perhaps its proxies, might have been involved in targeting global oil transport. Testing the waters, maybe? If that were the case, it could dramatically escalate the conflict on an international economic scale, and that could potentially force U.S. intervention due to the impact on global oil prices and trade, regardless of that official regime collapse trigger point we just discussed. It's a dangerous game of plausible deniability being played in a vital shipping lane.
A potential economic trigger, then, alongside the nuclear security one.
Okay.
And amidst all this escalating military tension, the political ambiguity, these potential triggers, there's even been talk, quite surprisingly perhaps, of negotiations. We're hearing about the prospect of U.S.-Iran meetings to somehow resolve the conflict diplomatically.
That's correct. It seems counterintuitive given everything else, but there are indeed reports of potential upcoming U.S.-Iran meetings, specifically mentioning figures like Steve Witkoff meeting Abbas Araki to discuss a negotiated settlement to the war. However, there's a great deal of skepticism, and probably for good reason, about the potential success of any such talks right now.
Why the skepticism? Beyond the obvious tensions.
Well, what's truly insightful here, according to our sources, are Israel's reported spoiler tactics. The analysis suggests a pattern. Every time the U.S. proposes a ceasefire or initiates moves towards negotiation with Iran, Israel responds by escalating the conflict, often, quite pointedly, by assassinating another key Iranian figure, like that newly appointed chief of staff we discussed earlier. This pattern makes any diplomatic progress incredibly difficult. It almost seems as if Israel, or elements within it, might be deliberately trying to derail negotiation efforts that they see as unfavorable.
Using assassinations to scuttle diplomacy. That's quite a charge.
It's a pattern that's been observed, according to these sources. Furthermore, even if talks did happen, any new negotiation would likely present Iran with even more severe demands than, say, Trump's original maximum pressure offer. We're talking demands for the complete dismantling of their nuclear program now, not just restrictions on enrichment levels or stockpile sizes. This raises the probability of acceptance from Tehran to, well, near zero, making these talks seem like a very, very long shot at best under current conditions.
Right. A non-starter for Iran, probably. So if a negotiated settlement is highly unlikely, and Israel's stated or perceived goal might be the removal of the Iranian regime, then what's the alternative? A prominent Israeli journalist named Zavi Barel offers a really stark warning about pursuing that ultimate goal, suggesting it could quickly devolve into a nightmare scenario.
Yeah, and this raises an important question. What exactly is the nightmare of regime change that Barel warns against so vehemently? He cautions Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu directly, apparently, that rapidly trying to overthrow the Iranian regime could quickly turn into a catastrophic nightmare, not just for Iran, but for Israel and the region. The reason, he explains, is terrifyingly logical. The remaining Iranian leaders, if they felt the regime was truly collapsing, facing an existential threat, fighting for their very survival, they might resort to any means necessary. All bets off.
Any means necessary. I'm like, what?
This could include dangerous, unconventional weapons that they might possess or could quickly develop or deploy in desperation. He points to the potential use of biological or chemical weapons, things Iran has been accused by the U.S. of possessing or developing in the past. Or even, perhaps more chillingly, the desperate deployment of a primitive nuclear bomb, maybe using that 60% enriched uranium they already have stockpiled. A dirty bomb or a crude device. This is the chilling contingency Barel points to, suggesting that pushing a cornered regime to the absolute brink could unleash horrors previously unthinkable in this conflict.
That's a truly chilling prospect. The Samson option, but for Iran, perhaps. But how stable is the Iranian regime right now if it's facing such intense internal pressure from assassinations, external military action? Could a popular uprising like the one Trump suggested actually materialize? Is the regime brittle?
It's a key question. But the Iranian regime, particularly under Khamenei, is deeply complex, and it's protected by multiple interlocking layers of loyal forces. It's not as brittle as some might think. It's not just the regular army. You have the highly ideological Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC. You have the besieged paramilitary forces, their vast volunteer militia known for fierce loyalty and brutality against dissent. You have standard security forces. And you have a very strong base IRGC supporters embedded throughout the country's economy and institutions. These groups are the primary beneficiaries of Khamenei's rule. They hold significant influence, wealth, power, and they would fight vigorously to prevent the regime's collapse because their own power, their own survival, is intrinsically tied to its continuation. They have everything to lose.
So it's not just the leadership, it's a whole system with deep roots and strong defenders. What about opposition groups?
Well, opposition groups like the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, MEK, or maybe supporters of the Shah's son living abroad, they are currently seen as unlikely to instigate a successful revolution from within. Our sources suggest they would immediately be accused of treason, of collaboration with the enemy, especially while Israel is actively striking Iran. That's a powerful narrative for the regime to use. It makes any popular uprising, particularly one perceived as instigated or supported by external forces, extremely difficult to sustain and highly vulnerable to brutal suppression. Plus, you have the religious factor. The clerical system is deeply rooted in religious conviction for many Iranians, far more so than, say, the more secular regime of the Shah back in 1979. That makes it harder to overthrow through purely political or economic discontent. It's a very resilient, multi-layered system, not easily fractured from the outside or even the inside right now.
Okay, so it's not simply a matter of removing one leader. It's an entire entrenched system, highly resistant. And what happens if Khamenei were, hypothetically, assassinated? Netanyahu has openly considered this, right? Claiming it would not escalate the conflict but end it. Is that realistic?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the risk associated with Khamenei's removal is profound and maybe counterintuitive to Netanyahu's hope. The risk of a far more radical successor is very real. If Khamenei were assassinated, especially amidst this chaos, there's simply no knowing who would emerge from the power struggle that would inevitably follow. The options for a successor regime, precisely because of the deep internal chaos and the nature of the Iranian power structure, they could very well be more radical, more unpredictable, maybe less constrained than Khamenei. This could potentially lead to an accelerated pursuit of a nuclear weapon, perhaps as a desperate measure for the new regime's survival, or to project an even greater show of strength and defiance.
So killing Khamenei might not end the problem. It might actually make the nuclear threat worse or bring it forward.
That's the potential unintended consequence, yes. Which leads us to the ultimate, sort of inevitable conclusion drawn by several of our sources. If this war ends without the complete physical destruction of Iran's nuclear program, which, as we've discussed, Israel has demonstrably struggled to achieve on its own, then the answer seems pretty simple, if stark. Iran will likely become a nuclear power, eventually. Israel's apparent inability to easily or quickly destroy the Iranian regime or its dispersed nuclear infrastructure. That combined with the ongoing, grinding war of attrition that Iran seems prepared to endure. It means Israel likely cannot sustain this conflict indefinitely without suffering immense, perhaps even existential losses itself. So the war probably won't end quickly. There's probably no easy revolution on the horizon to overthrow the regime from within. And all the while, the clock is ticking on Iran's nuclear ambitions. It's a deeply troubling strategic picture.
Wow. Okay, so as we wrap things up on this deeply complex and frankly quite sobering deep dive, what have we really learned from weaving together this mosaic of sources? We've seen the surprising, maybe nuanced U.S. stance, particularly through that lens of figures close to Trump, often contrasting sharply with the official public line,
You're
right?
definitely seeing those contradictions.
We've explored that stark difference between Netanyahu's confident narrative of Iranian weakness and the apparent reality of Israel's true exhaustion, indicating a protracted conflict, not a swift victory.
Yeah, the narrative versus reality gap seems huge.
We've uncovered Iran's unexpected resilience and its strategic patience, drawing those powerful parallels to its history of enduring wars of attrition and how it might be leveraging intelligence parity now.
Their long game seems underestimated.
And we've peeled back the layers to reveal those hidden realities within Israel itself, the panic-driven evacuations, the inadequate shelters, that disturbing internal strife and discrimination, all starkly contrasted with the alarming scale of Israeli intelligence penetration into Iran, that army of agents.
A real shadow war alongside the overt one.
Right. And all of this brings us to the terrifying implications of unintended consequences. If this conflict isn't managed with extreme care, the very solution being sought like regime change could lead to something far worse, like Beryl's nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
So given all of this, what does it truly mean today to be a regional power? And who holds the real leverage in this unfolding drama? It really challenges our assumptions about strength and influence, doesn't it?
And on that note, this situation is evolving daily, hourly sometimes it feels like. And it just underscores the critical importance for all of us, for you listening, to look beyond the surface, to question the easy assumptions, the dominant narratives, and to try and understand the multiple, often conflicting perspectives at play. It's so easy to get caught up in the headlines, the sound bites, but the deeper context, the historical parallels, the hidden realities we talked about, that's what truly informs our understanding. So stay curious, keep those questions coming, and remember that deep understanding is probably our best defense against information overload and simplistic narratives in times like these.
Couldn't agree more. Until next time, keep digging, and please don't forget to subscribe to the Deep Research Podcast for more in-depth analyses like this one. Thanks for tuning in.